This next session is called Innovative Approaches to Curriculum Design and Skill Development. And please give a very big, warm round of applause to our wonderful panel who've already on the stage. And I'm going to pass you over to Professor Chai Lei Ching, who is the Pro Vice Chancellor for Education at Sunway University. And just to say that Prof. Chai has been instrumental in putting the entire program together for this summit. So, Prof. Chai, thank you, and over to you.
Thank you so much. So this topic, while we look at the title, we are going to talk about innovative approaches to curriculum design and skill development. So perhaps, the most important keyword when we look at the title is innovative approaches. We talk about innovation.
Yeah, I think what we need is really to rethink the role of higher education from more ethical perspectives. This is my thesis. I believe these days I heard a lot of talks about skills development, preparing our students for the international job market, important as it is, but I heard much less talks about ethical values, social justice, critical consciousness development. So this book, The Emergence of the Ethically Engaged University, which I put together with my colleague Gus Gregorut in the United States, talks about a new way of conceptualizing higher education, which is much more oriented towards sustainability, global citizenship and global citizens development, critical consciousness development, as well as decolonizing our approaches to pedagogies. Because when it comes to global citizenship education, from ethical and transformative approaches to global citizenship education as promoted by UNESCO, this doesn't mean that we are looking only at the global. We are looking at the interconnection between the local and the global from ethical perspectives, values-based perspectives. So I'd like to hear more discussions in higher education on what kind of values we really want to foster in our learners so that they can become leaders able to engage in dialogue with diversity. This is my focus. I've been publishing extensively with Sage, Springer, Routledge, and many others, and I always try to bring in discussions on the role of educators, teachers, practitioners, and more in general, higher education in terms of promoting ethical values, sustainability. These are the key words I'm focusing on, and I'd like to see more discussions on this. And I believe this panel is important because the goal of this panel is to try to find ways to translate discussions on ethical values and more holistic approaches to higher education into practices, which is a real challenge. And Sunway University, the Times Higher Education, in putting together this event, definitely put a good cause. However, we still need to, discuss and see how we can implement ethical values in higher education.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Emiliano. When you mentioned about value-based, education, I think the main question is, I believe that all the universities over here try their best, to integrate values into their curriculum. So whether, probably the other panels, you could chip in anytime, is there any good practices, examples, you could share, how your university actually integrate value-based, education into your curriculum, and that actually works, but not making the curriculum into something dull and boring to the students. It can become very boring, when we talk about ethics, right? Yeah.
I disagree that it becomes boring.
Yeah.
I think it actually makes it really exciting and contentious. I originally I'm an engineer and come from a science background. And yes, you can have all the theory of how you design a tool or a technology, but it's how people use it and what's the impact of that tool on people in the local community, people in the global community. I think that's what makes it really exciting, and it brings that that kind of people-centered vision. So being able to teach all of our students how to evaluate their actions and thinking about what consequences their actions are going to have now and in the future, and who they're going to impact on, it makes for interesting discussion and interesting debate.
That's right.
And students can then explore their different perspectives, and that actually helps them develop all of those other skills that the keynote was talking about this morning, that kind of self-awareness, that resilience, that kind of critical thinking, being able to critique ideas, all come into that kind of ethical evaluation of actions. So I absolutely agree.
And if I can conclude this first part, I believe there are specific themes that need to be discussed. There is not a red line to cross. I think this idea that higher education should not cross red lines, it's limiting the real scope of the university itself. We need to approach themes and values with an open-minded mindset and have a dialogic approach. If you look back at Paulo Freire's discussion on dialogic pedagogy, this is what we need in the classroom setting and more broadly in a university. It's not a corporation, or should not be a corporation. It's a place where we try to foster values-based knowledge and we try to foster official leadership. And it seems that nowadays our leaders do not get it. And I'm concerned that this is due to how they've been educated.
That's right.
The colleague was using the word passion, and I think that's central when it comes to educators and teachers. Difficult to really develop passion if you have an extreme teaching load. If you have an extreme teaching load and the research agenda is not really in line with what you're passionate about. So that's another concern that we need to address. Plus, there is a real challenge for educators and to really implement, and I come back to the emergence of the ethical engaged university because this is my most recent book. It's difficult for educators to find sort of orientation within a framework that would assist them or guide them to implement ethical values, transformative pedagogy that eventually would help and assist students to become critical thinkers. And so what we found through the emergence of the ethical engaged university, which as I said at the beginning, is a different way to conceptualize higher education for the common good from an ethical perspective. What we found are at least 5 themes that can guide educators to actually implement in their pedagogies ethical values, global citizenship, and critical consciousness development. One is what we call the ethics of care. This is very much needed, caring about the other independently of where they are located and their cultural backgrounds. Respecting diversity is another big theme that emerged through this book, The Emergence of the Ethical Engaged University. So respecting diversity, praxis, so action and reflection, that's another theme that emerged in this conceptualization on how we can conceptualize higher education from an ethical perspective. Action and reflection is very important because one of the questions that I usually get from my students, particularly at the graduate level, is I got the need to do something for society, but how can I actually do it? So praxis, the principle of praxis emerged in the book as a very important part because it guides the educator and the student together toward what kind of action they can take for the betterment of society, for the common good. I like this word. And lastly, another big theme emerged in the book, The Emergence of the Ethical Engaged University, is humanity empowerment. So we need to empower our students from a humanistic standpoint so they really eventually become better human beings. Again, this all extreme focus on fostering skills for the international job market, important as it is, it doesn't work. It just doesn't work.
Yeah.
So we need to rethink really how we want to conceptualize higher
Yes.
education
Thank
and
you.
pedagogical approaches to higher education.
Sure. Yeah, when we talk about like, all of these ethics, like, values, I think the way that we need to assess it is not on paper, right? Like, is what they know, but it's like, to assess them, whether if they can actually put it into action, like, change the behavior. So while we talk about like, assessment, a lot of time right now, like, to all of us, even in Sunway University, one of the things that we have been discussed so intensely is on how do we use AI, like, do we allow students to use like, AI, and how do we redesign, rethink about assessment? Because ChatGPT, like, generative AI, it's so common that it doesn't make any sense, like, to just stop and ban our students from using generative AI. Is a technology that they can leverage on. Perhaps, like, we could, like, just pivot a little bit, like, talk about AI technology. So how can we use like, AI within our learning, teaching, and assessment practices for our students, like, to workload and a lot more things? Yeah.
Depends really how we use AI,
That's right.
right? So if it's a tool for critical consciousness development, that's okay. But still, we know that knowing without acting is insufficient. So even though we provide our students with AI, we don't stigmatize them because they use AI. We still need to do the extra effort as educators to foster certain ethical values, because the human-to-human relationship is irreplaceable, at least in my opinion, right? That's why the discussion on ethical values, the emergence of the ethically engaged university fits into this idea of AI, where you have a tool that can help to enhance critical consciousness development, but at the end of the day, you still maintain the relationship human to human in a way that encourages taking actions for the common good.
First of all, thank you for your very rich discussion about innovative approaches to curriculum design and skill development. I hear a lot of talk about AI, not just in this event, but for the past couple of days. So my question is this: what research-derived learning principles are most important in innovative approaches to curriculum design and skill development, especially in regards to AI?
So that's a really challenging question. I think a lot of the research we're seeing around AI in education at the moment is very kind of practice-based. It's kind of, oh, I've done this and this is what happened and this is what students thought and this is what faculty thought. There's none of that kind of big strategic, how should we shift the curriculum, certainly not in the research level. It hasn't kind of, I think we've only been doing this sort of stuff for maybe 15 months and, it hasn't filtered up to think, well, what's the strategic view? I've done a little bit of research myself, kind of exploring with faculty, kind of co-creating some principles that we should be applying to embedding AI, and it's that kind of approach that we're taking and actually thinking about, well, this was the domain before. Let's co-create some principles going forward. But at the heart of that is, let's actually start with our vision. What's our vision for our students, our faculty, our administrators, and how they're going to work ethically and responsibly with AI? You start with that vision and then build principles, and then you build practice on the top of that. I think that's the way that we're going to go forward and generate the evidence that you're asking for.
Yeah, I fully agree. We need to reverse this approach. So what are the values, first of all, that we want our students to take on board and develop in their lifelong learning, right? So we reverse that, and then the discussion on AI is part of it. How we can achieve humanity empowerment, how we can achieve critical consciousness development using partially AI as well. Keeping in mind that, again, and I will repeat this, knowing without acting is insufficient. So still the human-to-human relationship has to be there, and then AI can be a component that perhaps can encourage certain values ranging from ethics of care, humanity empowerment, critical consciousness development, all of this can be applied to a certain extent across faculty, across approaches to higher education.
It's almost like how do people learn, and are people learning differently, I think, when they're learning with AI. And I think what we need to think about, I kind of have been doing a little exercise where you actually take Bloom's taxonomy, you know, and think about how people learn through that, and think about what does that look like in an AI-enabled world. And it actually prompts us to ask some questions around how much knowledge do you actually need in an AI-enabled world? You know, you don't need that huge, wide knowledge base, perhaps, that we always, you know, taught traditionally. How can we get AI to help students learn how to apply, to test, to ask different questions? So learning, I think fundamentally the human process of how we learn things is exactly the same, but we can use this tool to facilitate that. And, you know, in some ways, tools like ChatGPT are an infinite teacher that never gets bored of you asking the same question until you understand the answers. You know, so, but we need to think about that in how we can use the tool to enhance learning, but the fundamental human learning process is, I believe, is the same. But, you know, I need a neuroscientist maybe on the panel as well to help with that.
The next time you need. Thank you. Yes, probably we have like, you know, this gentleman to ask the question first. Yeah, and after that, yeah, probably have the. Please.
Good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Supip. I'm come from the University of Puthasastra, Cambodia. So regarding with these topics, I see the term curriculum. So normally it related with teaching and learning. But since the morning until now, I heard just only the word AI. So I have two questions to ask the speaker. The first one is like, is there any difference or similarity between knowledge gain from AI and from reading book? And the second one is, do we accept the knowledge gain from AI? Why or why not?
Yeah. I'll add my question, which is similar. So this is a question which is asked by most of the teachers in India. I am Pankaj Mittal, Secretary General, Association of Indian Universities. So that question, which is basically a fear for all, is, can AI replace teachers?
We are talking more about AI right now. Yes,
I'll touch a little bit on the first one. I'm not an expert in this, but my feeling is, if you sort of think about when we moved from reading on paper to reading on electronic devices, we changed our reading style, didn't we? You know, I love having a physical book in my hand, and if it's a textbook or an academic paper, I still, I'm afraid, like my highlighter pen and all of that. I still read things, of course, consume content online, but it tends to be, I just want to pick out a couple of things for kind of maybe more surface knowledge, maybe that kind of different level of understanding. So I think it is different types of learning. But, you know, I know my kids don't do any, you know, if I kind of said, oh, here, you know, have some notebooks and highlighter pens that I got from a conference, they're like, what am I going to do with them exactly? You know, so maybe younger people can do both those types of reading in the different modes. I don't know the answer to that, but I know I personally have always used different media to read in different ways. So, and I think that will continue.
Yeah, Julie, Emilio, Julie, probably. Yeah.
Maybe I can answer about how can AI replace teachers. I'm asked this by medical students, can AI replace doctors? And I think the answers are the same, in that I think because the knowledge that you gain from, say, ChatGPT is vast, right, and fast. So you can ask a question and have it be comprehensively answered. But there are two things that you need to learn. Number one, it's not always correct. So students are still taught to reevaluate the answers that they got. For example, my computer science instructors at the college, they actually have an assignment where students are asked to use ChatGPT to write a code for something. And their job is to detect what's wrong with that code, because it's wrong. It's not usable. So they learn that there are limitations. The second thing is, I always tell my medical students, actually any student that asks me this question, it still goes back to human interactions. I think what it does to me truly is it frees up time for human-to-human interactions. and just one last small example, my daughter is a medical student, actually a first-year medical student. She uses ChatGPT to generate quiz cards for, say, anatomy, and it saves her so much time. So, and I can see, you know, because I compare to when I was a medical student, you know, I could never, like, she's in choral and stuff like that. I could never think of participating in things like that. And I think it frees up in a substantial amount of time for people to enjoy life and interact with other humans the way they should.
It's an helpful tool, but can you teach, for example, praxis, reflexive dialogue, decolonialism, caring ethics, humanity empowerment, eco-critical perspectives, just through AI? Yes, perhaps the students, learners, us can read something about these principles, but they are so deep that they need human-to-human interactions in order to be understood on a deep level. So I don't see, at least in the foreseeable future, AI replacing teachers, because these principles need an extensive discussion between humans.